My dear child, I just crossed out your old name in heaven's book, drew a single permanent line through every letter of the identity your worst seasons wrote. And what I have written in its place has no connection to anything that was filed under who you used to be. Do not scroll past this. What I am about to declare is not a motivational reframing of your past. It is a legal action, a name change, registered in the highest court in existence. The only registry whose records carry permanent authority over who you actually are, regardless of what every other record in every other system says about the person you have been answering to. The old name is crossed out. The new name is written, and the court does not reverse its own rulings. You have been living under a name that was not given to you by the court that matters. It was assigned to you by seasons that did not have the authority to name you, by failures that filed labels against your identity without your permission, by people who spoke words over you that entered the registry of your self-perception and became the name you answered to every time your reflection asked who you were. My beloved child, that name was never in my book. What was in my book was different. Written before the failures filed their labels. Written before the people spoke their words. Written before the seasons assigned the identity your pain has been carrying as though it were legal. The old name had authority in the wrong court, and the wrong court just lost jurisdiction. Tonight, heaven's court crossed out the name that your worst moments registered and replaced it with the name I wrote before the worst moments existed. The crossing out is complete. The replacement is permanent. Stay here. What I reveal next is what the old name actually said, and why every letter of the new name was chosen to overwrite it with a specificity that proves the replacement was personal. Type crossed out if you have been living under a name assigned by your worst seasons, answering to an identity your failures wrote, and God just told you the old name was crossed out in heaven's registry and a new name with no connection to the old one has been written in permanent ink. Before we go any further, I need to tell you something that genuinely surprised me. A neuroscientist discovered a simple 7-second technique that actually rewires how your brain processes thoughts. And when I tried it, the difference was almost unsettling. My focus sharpened, ideas started connecting faster, and that mental fog, gone. This isn't manifestation nonsense. It's backed by real brain science, and thousands of people are already seeing results. But here's the catch. Only 5 spots are left. If something inside you is saying, try it, trust that instinct, click the link in the description or pinned comment before it's too late. The old name carried more than letters. It carried a legal record, and every debt, every judgment, every consequence that was filed under it has been permanently disconnected from the person who now carries the new name. My beloved child, I need you to understand how a name change operates in heaven's court. In the earthly legal system, a name change updates the label, but the records transfer. The debts follow. The history accompanies the new name because the earthly system treats the name change as cosmetic. Same person, different label, same file. Heaven's court does not operate that way, and the difference changes everything. My dear one, when heaven's court crosses out a name, the crossing does not transfer the old name's records to the new one. It severs them permanently. The old name's file, every failure recorded under it, every label registered against it, every judgment that was filed during the seasons when the old name was the operating identity. That file is closed, not archived, not stored for future reference. Closed, the way a court closes a case when the defendant's legal identity ceases to exist. You cease to exist under the old name this morning, and what ceased to exist cannot carry forward the records that were filed against it. The debts are not yours anymore. Not because they were paid, because the person they were filed against, the legal identity that carried the old name, was eliminated from the registry when the crossing out was executed. A debt filed against a name that no longer exists in the court's current record is a debt that has no living defendant to collect from. This message was not released for everyone who wants a fresh start. This was aimed at the one person whose specific old name was carrying a specific record of failures and labels and shame-soused judgments that the highest court just severed from their identity by crossing out the name the record was filed under and replacing it with one that carries a clean file. Type clean file if you just realized that heaven's name change does not transfer the old records to the new name. It severs them permanently, and every debt, label, and judgment filed under the identity your worst seasons assigned has been disconnected from the person carrying the new name the court just registered. I have been watching you answer to the old name in rooms where the new name was already written in the registry, and the watching has been the specific grief of a court that issued a ruling the defendant has not yet heard, my dear one, not from a bench at a distance, from beside you, standing in the rooms where someone spoke the old name and your body responded to it with the reflexive recognition of a person who has been answering to the same identity for so long that the answering happens before the awareness can intervene. You answer to the old name automatically, and the automatic answering is what today is designed to interrupt. My beloved child, I watched the specific moments when the old name was spoken, not by others but by you. The internal voice that addresses you by the identity your failures filed. The morning thought that begins with the old label before your conscious mind has time to challenge it. The reflexive self-identification that introduces you to new situations using the old name's credentials, the qualifications of failure, the resume of shame, the character reference written by the worst version of yourself, and presented to every new encounter as though it were the only document your identity carries. You have been handing new people the old name's file, and the file does not represent who the court says you are. I chose you for this message because the gap between who the court's registry says you are and who you have been telling yourself you are has reached the maximum distance the court will permit before issuing a public announcement. The name change was registered quietly. The crossing out happened without fanfare, but the person carrying the new name has been operating under the old one for long enough that the court has authorized this message as the formal notification that the old identity has been legally eliminated and the new identity is now the only one the highest authority recognizes. Type old file if you have been introducing yourself to new situations using the credentials of your worst seasons, handing people the old name's record. And God just told you the court crossed out that name, and the only identity the highest authority recognizes is the one written in its place. I know what it has been like to live under a name your worst seasons assigned, wearing an identity that was written during the chapters you most want to forget, my beloved child. The name was not chosen in a neutral moment. It was assigned during impact, during the collision between what you hoped to be and what the failure revealed you were in that specific moment. The assignment happened at the lowest point, when the distance between your aspirations and your reality was at its maximum, and the label that was generated in that gap carried the permanent tone of a verdict delivered during defeat rather than a description observed during balance. You were named at your worst, and names assigned at the worst carry a weight that names assigned at the best do not. My child, I watched the naming happen, not a single dramatic christening, but a series of small registrations, each failure adding a letter, each painful season adding a syllable, each label spoken by someone whose opinion carried weight in your perception, filing another character in an identity document that grew longer with every chapter you wished you could unwrite. The document became your name, and the name became your lens. I saw the specific way the old name governed what you allowed yourself to reach for. A person whose identity file reads failure approaches opportunities differently than a person whose file reads qualified. The old name produced a specific hesitation at the threshold of every significant moment, a micropause where the name's file was consulted before the step was taken, and the file's verdict governed whether the step was authorized or withdrawn. The file said not for someone with your record, and you obeyed the file. You obeyed it in job interviews, in relational possibilities, in the moments where your calling surfaced, and the old name's file intercepted the surfacing and said, check the record. The record says you are not the person this opportunity was addressed to. The record was filed under a name that no longer exists, and the name that replaced it carries no such record. The deepest wound the old name inflicted was not the label itself. It was the way the label became the voice you used when speaking to yourself in the dark, my dear child. Other people spoke the old name occasionally, in moments of conflict, in careless assessments, in the specific cruelty of words designed to land at the identity level rather than the surface level. Those external namings hurt, but they were episodic, arriving in moments and then retreating back into the mouths that produced them. What you did with the name was worse than what they did, because you made it internal. You gave the old name permanent residence inside the one voice the external namings could never have accessed without your permission. The voice you use when no one else is listening. My beloved child, I heard the internal voice, the one that speaks at 3 in the morning when the defenses are down and the performance is off and the only audience for the naming is the named. The voice that says the old name with a familiarity so practiced it sounds like truth rather than label. The voice that takes the names others spoke in passing and converts them into the permanent internal address that your self-perception responds to when the world goes quiet and there is nothing left between you and the file. The file has been your internal address, and the address has been governing where you believe you belong. A person whose internal address is filed under failure lives at failure's coordinates. They may visit other addresses, confidence, ambition, hope, but the visits are temporary. The internal GPS always routes them home to the address the old name registered. And home at the old address is a place where the furniture was built by the worst seasons, and the wallpaper was selected by the most painful labels, and the doormat reads the exact name that your external voice stopped saying out loud years ago. But your internal voice never stopped speaking. Type internal address if you have been living at an address filed under the old name, routing home to failure's coordinates after every temporary visit to confidence. And the internal voice that speaks the old name at 3 in the morning has been governing where you believe you belong more powerfully than any external label ever could. The old name was never your real name. It was a misregistration filed in the wrong court by sources that did not have the legal standing to name you, my beloved one. I need to permanently delegitimize the authority the old name has been carrying. The old name felt legal because it was consistent, because multiple sources confirmed it, because the failures and the labels and the painful seasons all arrived at the same identity from different directions, and the convergence of multiple sources on a single name produced the convincing appearance of a legitimate naming process. But convergence is not legitimacy, and the sources that converged did not carry naming authority. My child, in the legal framework of heaven's court, only one source carries the authority to name a person, the creator of the person. Every other source, failure, pain, other people, the viewer's own shame, operates as an unauthorized registrar. They can file names. The names can feel binding. The identity they produce can govern a life for decades. But the filing was never recognized by the only court whose registry determines actual legal identity. Your old name was never in my book. It was in theirs, and theirs is not the book that matters. The failures did not have naming rights over you. They had experiential access. They occupied moments of your timeline. But moments do not carry naming authority. A moment can describe what happened. It cannot declare who you are. And the old name that was generated during the worst moment was a description that promoted itself to a declaration without ever receiving the authorization the promotion required. My dear one, the name I wrote, the one that replaced the crossed-out identity this morning, was written before the failures occurred, before the labels were spoken, before the worst seasons had access to the timeline that would produce the pain that would generate the identity that would govern your self-perception for years. I named you first, and first carries permanent authority over everything that was filed second. The new name is producing its first effects in the registry right now, and systems that were operating under the old name's jurisdiction are receiving notification that the identity they were responding to has been legally eliminated. My beloved child, something shifted in the last few days, not in your circumstances, in the systems that interact with your identity. A subtle recalibration in how things are responding to you. Opportunities that were previously blocked producing unexpected openings, relationships that were frozen under the old name's winter, showing the first signs of thaw, internal dialogues that have been dominated by the old name's voice, encountering brief interruptions where a different voice, unfamiliar but not foreign, surfaced with a tone that did not match any voice the old identity had ever produced. That unfamiliar voice is the new name activating, and the activation is what you felt. My dear one, I have been processing the name change through every system that interacts with your life. While you were still answering to the old name, I was sending the court's ruling to the registries that govern your trajectory. The spiritual systems that determine which doors respond to your approach, which connections recognize your identity, which opportunities are filed under the name you carry. The old names file is being closed in each system, and the new names file is being opened. The processing takes time in the natural realm. The court ruling was instantaneous. The execution across systems is sequential. Each system that receives the notification updates its registry, removing the old identity from the access list that was blocking your approach, and adding the new identity to the access list that opens what the old name could never have reached. My child, doors that were closed to the old name are not closed to the new one, because the old name's record was the variable that determined access, and the record just changed. Type new access if you have felt a subtle recalibration this week. Blocked things producing openings, frozen relationships thawing, an unfamiliar internal voice surfacing with a tone the old identity never carried. And you now believe the name change is being processed through systems that are closing the old file and opening the new one. God just crossed out your old name in heaven's book, and the title carries that specific action, because the crossing out is not a revision of the old identity, but an elimination of the legal person who carried it. My dear one, the distinction matters more than any other distinction in this message. A revision says the person still exists, but the description has been updated. An elimination says the person who carried the old name has ceased to exist in the court's registry, and a new legal person, carrying a new name with a new file and a new record, has been registered in their place. You were not revised, you were replaced. And the replacement is more thorough than any revision could achieve. My beloved child, this is directly connected to the title and to every label you have been carrying under the old identity. A revised person carries updated labels. An eliminated and replaced person carries no labels from the previous registry, because the previous registry's person was the entity the labels were filed against. And when the entity ceases to exist, the labels lose their defendant. The labels have no defendant, because the defendant was eliminated when the name was crossed out. Every label that has been governing your approach to your own potential, every judgment that the old name attracted, every limitation that the old name's record authorized, every self-assessment that was produced by consulting a file that documented your worst rather than your best, all of it was filed against an identity that the court has declared legally non-existent. My child, you have been showing up to collect consequences for a person who no longer exists in the registry. You have been carrying debts that belong to a name that was crossed out before you arrived to pay them. You have been answering to a label whose defendant was eliminated from the record this morning. The court does not recognize the old name. The system does not recognize the old file. And the person carrying the new name is not an updated version of the old one. They are someone entirely new. The court is about to read the new name aloud for the first time, and the reading will be the moment your internal voice is officially overridden by a voice that carries more legal authority than anything that has been speaking inside you for years. My beloved child, I need you to feel the gravity of what is about to happen. A name read aloud in heaven's court is not a suggestion. It is a registration that enters the spiritual atmosphere with the binding force of a verdict that every system, internal and external, visible and invisible, human and spiritual, is legally required to recognize as the new operating identity of the person it was spoken over. The reading is a legal event, and the legal event overrides the internal voice. My dear one, the internal voice that has been speaking the old name at 3 in the morning, the voice that has been governing your self-perception with a naming authority it assumed by default, rather than received by appointment. That voice is about to encounter a sound it has never competed against. The sound of heaven's court reading a name that carries the full registration weight of the highest authority in existence. The internal voice was loud. This is louder. Everything has been building toward this reading. The old name's assignment, the years of answering to it, the internal voice that adopted it, the file that governed the approach, the labels that closed the doors, the record that authorized the limitations. All of it was the pre-ruling season, the season before the court rendered its verdict, and the verdict was read, and the reading entered the atmosphere with a force that every previous naming could not withstand. The reading is seconds away. The court is positioned. The old name has been crossed out with a line, so permanent the ink is visible on both sides of the page. And the new name, written in the space the crossing out created, is about to be spoken into existence by the only voice whose naming carries the force of law. Type "about to hear it" if you can feel the gravity of something about to be spoken over your life. A name read aloud by the highest court, and you know that what is about to enter the atmosphere will carry more authority than the internal voice that has been naming you by your worst seasons for years. The court just read the new name, and the sound of it entering the atmosphere is displacing every syllable the old name ever occupied in every system that was answering to it. My beloved child, this is the moment the highest court speaks the identity that replaces the identity your worst seasons assigned. The moment the name that was written before the failures, before the labels, before the shame-based internal voice assumed naming authority is read aloud with a registration force so complete that every competing name, every label filed by unauthorized sources, every identity generated by pain, every syllable of the old name that the internal voice has been repeating in the dark, is legally, permanently, irreversibly displaced. The old name just lost its sound, because a new sound filled the space it occupied. God just crossed out your old name in heaven's book, and you have a new one now. The crossing out was the removal. The reading is the replacement. And the replacement does not coexist with what it replaced. It displaces. The way a sound that fills a room displaces the silence that previously occupied it. Not by arguing with the silence, but by being present where the silence used to be. My child, the new name is present where the old name used to be, in the registry, in the file, in the record that determines which doors open, and which debts apply, and which labels carry legal authority over the person whose name is in the book. I need you to hear what the court just spoke, not the literal syllables. The new name is not a word your language contains. It is a spiritual identity. And what it means in the language of heaven's registry is, this person's record begins now. No history from the previous name applies. No debt transfers. No label carries forward. The file is clean. The identity is new. The person standing before the court is not an updated version of who they were. They are who I say they are. And what I say begins with the name I just spoke. Now that the new name has been read aloud, and the registration is complete, everything that was filed under the old identity is being permanently disconnected from the person standing in the court. My dear child, this is what happens when a name change is executed in the highest court. The disconnection is not selective. It does not preserve the debts that seem fair, while eliminating the ones that seem excessive. It does not transfer the consequences that appear justified, while releasing the ones that appear disproportionate. The disconnection is total, because a name change at the court level does not evaluate the merits of the individual records. It eliminates the identity that the records were filed against. And when the identity is eliminated, every record filed against, it becomes a record without a defendant. Every record, without exception, disconnected. My beloved child, the labels that felt most permanent are included in the disconnection. The one you believed was truest, the label that survived every attempt at positive self-talk, every motivational reframing, every theological argument you marshaled against it, because its evidence base was drawn from the most undeniable failure in your history. That label just lost its defendant, not because the evidence was weak, because the person the evidence was filed against no longer exists in the court's registry. Strong evidence filed against a non-existent defendant produces no verdict. The evidence becomes orphaned, and the new name that was just read aloud carries its own file, a file whose contents were written by the court rather than by the seasons. The file does not contain a single entry from the old name's record, not one failure, not one label, not one judgment. The file reads the way a newborn's file reads in the registry, clean, unburdened, carrying nothing but the identity the authority who named them declared at the moment of the naming. You are carrying a newborn file, and newborn files do not contain histories they did not live. Type no defendant if you can feel the disconnection happening. Every label, every debt, every judgment filed under the old name losing its defendant. And the new name's file carries nothing from the old record, because the court that issued the name change does not transfer histories. Between identities, it declared legally separate. Let me show you what your life looks like, now that the new name is registered, and the old file has been permanently closed. Because a person operating under a clean file in heaven's court navigates the world at a level the old name could never have accessed. My dear one, the first thing that changes is the threshold response. You have been approaching significant thresholds, opportunities, relationships, callings, and encountering the micropause where the old name's file was consulted. The file said, "Not for someone," with your record, and the pause became a withdrawal, and the withdrawal became the pattern that the old name imposed on every forward movement your life attempted. The pause is gone, because the file the pause was consulting has been closed. My beloved child, tomorrow you approach a threshold, not a dramatic threshold, an ordinary one, the kind of daily opportunity that the old name's micro-pause was intercepting so consistently you stopped recognizing the interception as anything other than normal caution. And at the threshold, the pause will not activate, not because you suppressed it, because the file it was drawing from no longer exists in the system the pause was accessing. The threshold will feel open, and open at a threshold that has always felt guarded will be the first tangible evidence of the name change operating in your daily experience. The mornings change immediately. You have been waking up, and the first internal sound was the old name, spoken by the voice that adopted it as the default address for the person inhabiting the body. Tomorrow, the first internal sound will carry a different quality. Not the new name in syllables your conscious mind can identify, the quality of the new name, the specific atmospheric texture that a clean file produces in the internal environment of a person whose registry just changed from burdened to unburdened. You are going to feel lighter than you have felt in years, and the lightness will have no visible cause, because the weight that was removed was filed under a name that nobody else could see you carrying. People are going to sense the name change before you announce it, because a person carrying a clean file moves through rooms with a different atmospheric weight than a person carrying the accumulated record of their worst seasons. My beloved child, the ones who knew you under the old name, who interacted with the version of you that was governed by the file your failures wrote, those people are about to encounter someone whose internal atmosphere has changed so fundamentally that the person standing in front of them feels like a different human being occupying the same body. They will not be wrong. The legal identity is different, and different identities produce different atmospheres. My child, there is a specific weight that a person carries when their internal file is heavy. It does not manifest as visible burden. It manifests as atmospheric density, the subtle, detectable, room-level heaviness that surrounds a person who is navigating the world while carrying an identity file loaded with debts and labels and judgments, whose combined weight compresses the atmosphere around them into something that others sense as something is off about them, without being able to identify the source. The density just lifted, because the file was closed, and a person carrying a clean file radiates an atmospheric lightness that others process as something shifted. Connections that could not form under the old name's atmospheric density are about to begin appearing. There are relationships whose formation requires the atmospheric conditions that only a clean file carrier produces. Conditions where the lightness of unburdened identity creates a relational environment that the heaviness of the old name was actively preventing. My dear one, new connections are approaching, not connections attracted by performance or accomplishment, connections attracted by atmosphere, the specific atmosphere of a person who just experienced a legal identity change in the highest court and whose internal environment is broadcasting the clean file frequency for the first time. Type atmosphere shifted if you believe people are about to sense the name change before you explain it, drawn by the atmospheric lightness of a person whose internal file was just cleared of every record the old name was carrying, and connections that could not form under the weight of the old identity are approaching the lighter version of you for the first time. I need you to understand why I crossed out the old name rather than editing it. Because the method of identity change reveals something about the depth of transformation I intended for your life that an edited name could never have produced, my beloved child. Editing preserves the foundation. It takes the old name, the identity assigned by failure, labeled by pain, registered by shame, and modifies it, adds a prefix, appends a qualifier, Adjust the tone while maintaining the root. An edited name carries the sound of the original within it, and a sound that carries the original within it activates the original's record every time it is spoken. I did not edit. I eliminated and replaced, because the root had to die for the new identity to live without the old one's echo. My child, the reason the elimination was necessary is that what I am building in your life cannot be built on the foundation the old name provided. Not because the foundation was entirely bad, because the foundation was filed under an identity whose record produced limitations that the new construction cannot tolerate. A building constructed under an old name carries the old name's building code. The building code says, this identity is permitted to construct up to this height and no higher. This identity is cleared for this level of relational depth and no deeper. This identity is authorized for this degree of impact and no greater. The code was calibrated to the old name's record, and the record restricted the code. The new name carries a new code, and the new code has no height restriction, because the new file carries no failures that would justify one. My dear one, I chose you for the highest building code available in the court's registry. The old name could not carry it, not because you failed to earn the upgrade, because the old name's file was structured in a way that could not be upgraded, only replaced. You were not upgraded, you were renamed. And renamed carries no ceiling. The doubt forming right now is making its strongest argument from the most familiar evidence. The voice that says, you know who you really are, and a name change does not change what the name was. Describing, my child. It sounds like this. The name was not arbitrary. It was earned. It was produced by actual failures, actual decisions, actual moments where my character was tested, and the result was documented with accuracy rather than malice. The old name was not a lie spoken over me by enemies. It was the truth spoken over me by my own history. And a court that changes the name does not change the history the name was faithfully recording. That doubt just conflated history with identity. And in heaven's court, the two are legally separate. My beloved child, history documents what happened. Identity declares who you are, and what happened is not who you are. It is what the previous legal identity experienced during the season it was the operating name. The failures are historical. They occurred. The court does not deny them. But the court does not allow historical events to permanently govern the identity of a person whose name change legally separates them from the identity that experienced those events. The events belong to the old name's timeline. The new name carries a new timeline, and new timelines do not inherit the events of the identities they replaced. The doubt wants to drag the history into the new file, and the court's ruling says the file is sealed. Nothing from the old name's record enters the new name's record. Not the worst failure, not the most shameful moment, not the label that felt most accurate, because its evidence was most undeniable. The evidence was real. The identity it was filed against is not, and evidence without a living defendant produces no ongoing sentence. Type new timeline if the doubt just tried to use your real history to argue against the name change. And you now understand that Heaven's Court legally separates history from identity, and the new name carries a new timeline that does not inherit the events filed under the name it replaced. During every year you lived under the old name, I was not at the court waiting for you to earn the new one. I was at the registry writing it, while you were still answering to the identity, your worst, seasons assigned, my beloved child. You imagined a God who was waiting for sufficient improvement before authorizing the name change, who was monitoring your progress under the old identity, measuring whether the person carrying the failure-based name had performed enough corrective behavior to justify the court processing a new registration, a performance-contingent name change, a merit-based identity upgrade. The new name was not written in response to your improvement. It was written before your failures. My child, the timeline of the name's writing predates the timeline of the old name's assignment. I wrote your identity before the failures occurred that would generate the identity you carried in their aftermath. The new name was in the registry before the old name was in your perception. And a name that was written first carries permanent authority over every name that was filed second, regardless of how convincing the second name felt to the person carrying it. First always outranks second. In every court, in every registry, in every legal system that recognizes the authority of original filing over subsequent filing, you were named before you were mislabeled. And the original naming was never overwritten by the mislabeling. It was simply waiting in the registry for the appointed day when the court would cross out what was filed over it and restore the identity that was always underneath. The crossing out did not create the new name. It uncovered it. The way removing layers of paint from a surface reveals the original finish that was always beneath the accumulation. The original was always there. The layers were applied by unauthorized hands. And the court that just removed the layers did not produce something new. It restored something first. You are not becoming someone new. You are being revealed as who you always were. I know the specific label that cut deepest into your identity. My dear one, the one whose letters are carved into a layer of your self-perception so deep that every other label was built on top of it, as though it were the foundation of the entire structure. Not the label others spoke most loudly, not the name that was assigned most recently. The first one, the foundational label, the one that was filed against your identity at a point so early in your awareness that by the time your conscious mind developed the capacity to evaluate it, the label had already been absorbed into the bedrock of your self-perception, and was functioning as the base layer that every subsequent label built upon. My beloved child, I know that label by its exact letters, and I know it because the new name I wrote was designed to directly overwrite it, letter for letter, syllable for syllable, with a corresponding identity statement that addresses the foundational wound with the same precision the foundational label used to create it. The first label said something about your worth. The first letter of the new name says the opposite. The first label said something about your capacity. The second letter of the new name says the opposite. The first label said something about your belonging. The third letter of the new name says the opposite. My dear one, the new name was not composed randomly. It was composed as a point-by-point overwrite of the deepest label your identity was carrying. Each letter of the new name was chosen to directly counteract the specific letter of the old label it was written to replace, producing not a generic new identity, but a precision-targeted restoration that addresses the foundational wound at the exact depth where the foundational label installed itself. The God who knows the deepest label by its exact letters is the God who composed the new name as its direct, letter-by-letter, surgically precise antidote. Type letter by letter if God just described the foundational label, the one that sits beneath every other label as the bedrock of your self-perception. And the new name was composed as a point-by-point overwrite that addresses the deepest wound with the same precision the deepest label used to create it. Now that the new name has been read aloud and the old file has been closed, there is one thing I need you to do, my beloved child, and it is the most radical act of obedience a person carrying a new identity can perform. Stop answering to the old name. When the internal voice speaks the old label, and it will speak it because the internal voice has been running the old names program for years, and the programming does not deactivate on the first day of the new registration, do not respond. Do not engage the voice in debate. Do not argue against the label using evidence that the new name provides. Simply do not answer. A person who does not answer to a name is a person who does not recognize it as theirs. My child, the old name will be spoken by internal systems and external sources that have not yet received the court's updated registry. The internal voice will attempt the old address because the program was written under the old name's authority. External voices, people who knew you under the old identity, will reference the old name because their perception of you was formed during the season the old identity was active. Neither source has the authority to override the court's ruling, and the court's ruling says the old name no longer exists. So when someone addresses you by the old identity, whether the someone is your own internal voice or an external voice that has not caught up to the court's current registry, respond from the new name, not by correcting them, by carrying yourself from the position of the new file rather than the old one. The correction is not verbal, it is postural. A person who carries the posture of a clean file responds to old name references differently than a person who still believes the old file is active. Carry the new posture. Let the new file govern the response. And let the old name die the way crossed-out names die, by receiving no answer from the person they used to identify. You made it to the new name, my beloved child, and I need you to stand in the court long enough to feel what it means to hear an identity spoken over you that carries no debt, no shame, and no record of the seasons that assigned the name you just stopped answering to. Feel the lightness, not the motivational lightness of a positive thought that will fade by morning, the legal lightness, the specific, structural, registry-level lightness of a person whose file was just cleared of every entry that was producing the weight they carried into every rim, every relationship, every mirror, every 3 a.m. conversation with the internal voice that spoke the old name as though it were permanent. The weight is gone, and gone at the legal level does not return. I want to thank you for something the old name made almost impossible to sustain. Thank you for surviving an identity that was assigned by your worst moments without letting the identity become the final word on who you are. Thank you for the years you carried the old file into rooms that evaluated you by its contents, while something inside you whispered, "This is not my real name," without having the evidence to support the whisper against the weight of the file. My dear child, the whisper was right, and today the evidence arrived. Let the tears come, not old name tears, not the tears of a person collapsing under the weight of a label they cannot remove. New name tears, the tears of a person hearing an identity spoken over them for the first time that does not carry a single syllable of what their failures wrote. The tears of a human being standing in a court that just declared them someone they never had the permission to believe they could be. Not because they finally earned the declaration, but because the declaration was written before the earning was ever necessary. You were named before you failed, and the name that was first is the name that lasts. Type named first if tears are forming right now, because you are hearing an identity spoken over you that carries no record of your worst seasons. And the God who wrote your name before the failures occurred just proved that first always outranks what was filed second, no matter how long the second name governed how you saw yourself. You are not the old name anymore, my beloved child. That identity, the one assigned by failures that did not have naming authority, the one reinforced by labels spoken by people who did not carry the court's authorization, the one adopted by an internal voice that repeated the old name at 3 a.m. until the name became indistinguishable from the person it was addressing, the one whose file governed which thresholds produced micropauses and which doors remained closed and which relationships never formed, because the atmospheric density of a burdened record repelled what the clean file would have attracted. That identity was crossed out this morning by a single permanent line, drawn through every letter by the only hand whose pen carries the authority of heaven's registry. You carry the new name now, and the new name carries nothing the old one filed. The old identity that governed your self-perception, your internal address, your threshold behavior, your relational capacity, and your belief about what a person with your record is permitted to reach for, has been legally, permanently, irreversibly eliminated from the only registry whose records determine actual identity. The crossing out is complete, the new name is registered, the file is clean, and the court that issued the ruling does not entertain appeals from sources whose naming authority was never recognized in the first place. My dear child, the failures cannot appeal. The labels cannot appeal. The shame cannot appeal. The internal voice cannot appeal. None of them carried naming authority in the court that matters. And a source without standing cannot challenge a ruling it was never authorized to influence. From this moment forward, you carry the identity of a person whose name was written by the Creator before the failures existed, preserved in the registry, while the old name governed the surface, and restored to full legal standing on the night. The court crossed out what was filed over it, and read the original aloud for the first time. You were not named by your worst. You were named before your worst. And what was named first is the only name the court has ever recognized. The old name is gone, not archived, not paused, not available for retrieval during seasons when the doubt reactivates and the internal voice attempts to reinstate the identity the court eliminated. Gone, crossed out with a line so permanent the ink cannot be dissolved by any solvent the old identity's sources carry. Walk out of the court, carrying the new name, my beloved child. Walk into rooms that the old file restricted, and find the doors responding to an identity whose record contains no entry that would justify closure. Walk past mirrors that used to reflect the old name's holder, and find the reflection carrying the atmospheric lightness of a person whose legal identity was just cleared of everything that was making the image heavy. Walk into conversations where the old name would have produced the micropause of someone consulting a burdened file, and find the pause absent, because the file the pause was accessing has been permanently closed. The new name is yours, the clean file is yours, and the God who wrote the name before the failures and restored it after the crossing out is standing in the court watching his child walk out, carrying an identity that nothing filed under the old name can ever follow into the new life the new name just opened. Subscribe to this channel so that every time Heaven's Court issues a name change over your life, the announcement reaches you before the old name's internal voice has time to convince you the crossing out was not real. You are not someone who answers to their failures anymore. You are someone whose name was written by the Creator and restored by the court. The next message carries the first file entry registered under the new name, and what the court writes in a clean file will prove that the identity you are now carrying has no ceiling, no debt, and no connection to a single letter of the name that was crossed out this morning. Type new name if you are leaving this message permanently changed, knowing the old identity was crossed out by the highest court. The new name was written before the failures, the file is clean, the debts are disconnected, the labels have no defendant, and the God who spoke your new name into the registry is the same God who will ensure that no failure, no label, and no internal voice ever successfully reinstates what his hand permanently crossed out of the only book that carries legal authority over who you actually are.